It was a humid evening in Ibadan. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, orange shadows over the market street. The vendors were packing up, their day nearing an end, but the air was still thick with the smells of fried plantains, grilled corn, and spices. Adewale moved through the crowd like a ghost, his broad shoulders parting the sea of people, yet no one truly acknowledging him. He was used to it. A man like him could never truly blend in, despite how much he tried. At 6 feet 4 inches, with a body that seemed as if it had been carved from stone, Adewale was a man who naturally attracted attention. His face, sharp and defined, often turned heads, but it was not his appearance that made him an object of gossip. It was something else, something far more personal. He kept his head down as he walked, not out of shame but out of exhaustion. The whispers that followed him everywhere had long since become background noise, but today, they seemed louder. He could feel the eyes of the market women following him, their glances full of curiosity and judgment. He knew what they were thinking. They had heard the rumors, the same rumors that had followed him since he was a teenager. Adewale, the one with they whispered, trailing off as if to preserve some form of modesty, but everyone knew what they were referring to. His manhood had been the subject of speculation for years, growing in legend with each retelling. For some men, this would have been a source of pride, but for Adewale, it had been nothing but a curse. What should have been a gift had become the very thing that kept him isolated from the world. As he passed by a group of women selling akara, they giggled, their eyes flickering toward him before quickly looking away. Adewale clenched his jaw and kept walking. He was used to this by now, used to being the subject of conversation but never the recipient of genuine attention. Women were curious about him, yes, but none had ever stayed. None had ever seen beyond the physical. He sighed, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. It was always the same. No matter where he went, he carried the burden of his body, the way it set him apart from everyone else. He had tried to find love, real, meaningful connections, but every time, his size became an obstacle. It was too much for the women he had been with, both physically and emotionally. They were fascinated at first, drawn in by the rumors, but when reality set in, they couldn't handle it. And so, they left. Adewale's thoughts drifted, as they often did, back to the women he had loved or tried to love. Their faces were etched into his memory, each one representing a failed attempt at intimacy, at connection. Each one a reminder that he was different, that he would always be alone. Eniola had been the first. He was 18, and she was the first woman who had looked at him like he was more than just his body. They had met in secondary school, their friendship blossoming into something more over time. Eniola had been kind, gentle, and Adewale had fallen for her in a way that left him vulnerable. For the first time in his life, he thought that maybe, just maybe, someone could love him for who he was, not just for what he represented. But when the moment came for them to be intimate, everything changed. Eniola had been curious at first, her hands trembling as they explored his body, but when she finally saw all of him, her curiosity turned to fear. Adewale could still remember the way she had pulled back, her eyes wide with shock. "I can't, it's too much," she had whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and shame. "I'm sorry, Adewale, but I can't." She had left him that night, and a week later, she moved to another city. Adewale never heard from her again. The pain of that rejection had cut deep, but it was only the beginning. After Eniola came Funk. She was different, bold, confident, the kind of woman who seemed like she could handle anything life threw at her. Adewale had been drawn to her fiery personality, her ability to make him laugh even on his darkest days. They had spent months together, and for a while Adewale believed that things might be different with her. But when the time came for them to be intimate, Funk too found herself overwhelmed. Despite her initial confidence, she couldn't cope with his size. Their first and only attempt at intimacy was awkward and painful, and afterward, Funk had tried to reassure him. "It's not you, Adewale," she had said, her eyes full of pity. "It's just too much for me." Those words haunted him for years. Too much. His body, the very thing that should have brought him closer to the people he cared about, was what drove them away. After Funk, there had been a string of short-lived relationships, each one ending in the same way. No matter how much he tried to explain, no matter how patient or understanding his partners seemed, they all left. Some were polite about it, others were not, but the result was always the same. Adewale was alone. By the time he reached his late 20s, he had given up on love. It was easier that way, easier to focus on his work as a carpenter and keep his head down. The rhythmic sound of hammering nails and the smell of sawdust became his companions, filling the void left by human connection. But no matter how hard he worked, no matter how much he tried to distract himself, the loneliness never went away. It was on one of those lonely evenings that Adewale first met Sword. He had gone to his usual cafe, the one tucked away on a side street that most people didn't frequent. It was quiet, unassuming, and that was exactly why Adewale liked it. He could sit by the window, drink his coffee, and watch the world go by without having to interact with anyone. It was his refuge, a place where he could be alone with his thoughts. But that day, everything changed. He had just sat down with his coffee when the door to the cafe swung open, and a woman walked in. She was striking, not in an obvious way, but in the way she carried herself. There was a quiet confidence about her, a calm self-assurance that made people take notice. Her hair was tied back in a simple bun, and she wore a flowing dress that swayed with each step. Adewale watched her out of the corner of his eye, not wanting to stare but unable to look away. She ordered her coffee and then, to his surprise, sat down at the table next to his. For a few moments, they sat in silence, each sipping their drinks and staring out the window. Adewale wasn't sure why, but he felt a strange pull toward her, as if the space between them was charged with some unseen energy. Finally, she broke the silence. "You seem deep in thought," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Is everything okay?" Adewale blinked, caught off guard by her question. He wasn't used to strangers talking to him, especially not in such a direct, yet gentle, way. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice gruff. "Just thinking." She smiled, a small, knowing smile that made his heart skip a beat. "Mind if I sit with you? It feels a little lonely over here." Adewale hesitated for a moment, but something about her presence put him at ease. He nodded, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. And just like that, a conversation began. It started slow, as most conversations with strangers do, but before long, Adewale found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. There was something about Sword, something in the way she listened, that made him feel safe. She didn't push, didn't pry, but her questions were thoughtful, her interest genuine. They talked about everything: his work as a carpenter, her recent move to Ibadan from Lagos, the little things that made life both frustrating and beautiful. Adewale found himself laughing more than he had in years, the tension that had gripped his heart slowly loosening with each word. As the sun began to set outside the cafe, casting the room in a warm, golden light, Adewale realized something startling: he didn't want the conversation to end. For the first time in a long time, he wanted to stay, to talk, to be known. But beneath that desire was a familiar fear. The fear that had kept him alone for so long. What would happen when Sod learned the truth about him? Would she leave, just like the others? Over the next few weeks, Adewale and Sod's paths crossed more and more frequently. Sometimes it was by chance, bumping into each other at the market or in the park, but often, it was intentional. They began meeting for coffee regularly, and soon, those coffee dates turned into long walks through town, their conversations growing deeper and more intimate with each passing day. Sod had a way of making Adewale feel seen. Not just as the man everyone whispered about, but as a person with dreams, hopes, and fears. She listened without judgment, her attention never wavering when he spoke about his work or the small moments that made up his life. Adewale found himself opening up more with her than he had with anyone else, sharing parts of himself that he had long kept hidden. They walked through the busy streets of Ibadan, often losing track of time as they talked about everything, from their childhood memories to their hopes for the future. Sod would laugh at his stories, her laughter light and infectious, and Adewale couldn't help but smile along with her. He had never met anyone like her before, someone who seemed so genuinely interested in him, not as an object of fascination but as a person. Still, despite their growing closeness, Adewale couldn't shake the fear that lingered at the back of his mind. He knew where this was heading. The feelings between them were undeniable, and sooner or later, they would reach the point where he would have to reveal the one thing that had driven every other woman away. He wasn't ready to lose her. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't keep this part of himself hidden forever. Every time they grew closer, whether it was a lingering touch, a quiet moment shared in the park, or a brush of hands as they walked side by side, Adewale's heart raced, not just from the excitement of being with her but from the anxiety of what was to come. The intimacy they were building wasn't just emotional, it was leading toward something deeper. And as much as Adewale wanted to believe that things could be different with Sod, that maybe she was the one who could accept him as he was, the fear of rejection kept him from fully giving himself to her. It was a balmy evening in late summer when it finally happened. Adewale had invited Sod over to his apartment for dinner. He had spent the day cooking nothing too fancy, just jollof rice, fried plantains, and grilled chicken. But as the evening approached, his nerves began to get the better of him. He wasn't sure why, but tonight felt different. There was an unspoken tension between them, something that had been building for weeks. Sod arrived just after sunset, her smile as warm as ever as she stepped through the door. They sat down to eat, and as they talked and laughed over the meal, Adewale found himself relaxing. For a while, he forgot about the fear that had been gnawing at him, forgot about the looming conversation that he knew was inevitable. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to simply enjoy the moment. After dinner, they moved to the couch, their bodies close as they continued to talk. But as the night wore on, the air between them seemed to grow heavier, charged with something unspoken. Sod turned to him, her eyes soft and searching. "Adewale," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "There's something you're not telling me." Adewale's heart pounded in his chest. He had known this moment was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. He swallowed hard, his hands suddenly feeling too large, too clumsy, as they rested in his lap. "I'm different, Sod," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Physically. And it's caused problems in the past. I don't want to scare you off, but I need you to know." Sod didn't interrupt him, didn't press him for more details. She simply watched him, her gaze steady and full of understanding. "You don't have to explain everything now," she said softly. But whatever it is, I want you to know that I'm not like the others. I'm not going anywhere." Her words were like a balm to his soul, soothing the fear that had been building inside him for years. No one had ever said that to him before. No one had ever cared enough to stay. Without another word, Sod leaned in and kissed him. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, but as their lips moved together, the tension between them melted away. Adewale responded slowly, his hands finding their way to her waist as he pulled her closer. They moved together carefully, their bodies pressing against each other in a way that felt both familiar and foreign. For Adewale, this moment was different from anything he had experienced before. With Sod, there was no rush, no pressure. She didn't pull away, didn't hesitate, and for the first time in his life, Adewale felt truly accepted. But as their passion grew, so did Adewale's fear. He had been down this road before, and he knew how it usually ended. The moment of intimacy, the moment where his body would once again become an obstacle too great to overcome. As they neared that point, Adewale pulled back slightly, his breath ragged, his heart pounding in his chest. "Sod, I don't want to hurt you." Sod looked up at him, her eyes full of trust and understanding. "You won't," she whispered, her hand gently cupping his cheek. "We'll go slow. Together." Her reassurance was all he needed. Adewale nodded, his fear easing as he allowed himself to trust her, to trust that maybe, just maybe, things could be different this time. And they were. Their intimacy was careful, deliberate, and filled with a tenderness that Adewale had never experienced before. Sod didn't pull away, didn't flinch. Instead, she guided him, her confidence and calmness a steady presence that helped him let go of the fear that had held him back for so long. For the first time in his life, Adewale didn't feel like his body was a curse. With Sod, he felt whole. Complete. Afterward, as they lay together in the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the window, Adewale felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. Sod rested her head on his chest, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his skin, and for the first time in years, Adewale felt truly content. In the days that followed, everything seemed to change for Adewale. The weight that had been pressing down on him for so many years, the burden of his body, seemed to lift. He walked through the streets of Ibadan with a new sense of confidence, no longer caring about the whispers or the stares. It didn't matter what people thought of him anymore. He had found someone who saw him for who he truly was, someone who loved him not despite his body, but because of the person he was inside. Sod stood by his side, her presence a constant source of strength and comfort. She didn't care about the rumors, didn't pay any attention to the gossip that still swirled around them. All that mattered to her was Adewale, the man she had come to know and love. Their relationship deepened, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They spent more time together, sharing not just the good moments but the difficult ones as well. Sod was there for him in ways that no one else had ever been, and Adewale found himself opening up to her even more, sharing parts of himself that he had long kept hidden from the world. For the first time in his life, Adewale allowed himself to dream of a future with Sod by his side. They talked about marriage, about building a life together, about the family they might one day have. The thought of it filled Adewale with a sense of hope and joy that he hadn't felt in years. But more than anything, Sod had given him something that he hadn't realized he needed: acceptance. She had shown him that he wasn't defined by his body, that he was more than just the whispers and the rumors. With her, Adewale had found peace within himself, a peace that he had been searching for his entire life. One evening, a few months after that fateful night, Adewale and Sod sat together on a bench in the park. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, the air cool and crisp as the day slowly gave way to night. Adewale glanced over at Sod, her face bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, and felt his heart swell with gratitude. He still couldn't believe how lucky he was, how far he had come from the man he used to be. "You know," he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion, "I never thought I'd find someone like you." Sod smiled, her eyes sparkling as she turned to him. "You never had to find me, Adewale. I was always here. You just had to see that you were worth loving." Adewale's chest tightened with emotion as he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," he whispered, his voice thick with feeling. Sod leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. "You don't have to do anything. You deserve love simply because of who you are." Adewale smiled, his heart filled with a warmth that spread through his entire body. For so long, he had believed that his body was a barrier to love, a wall that no one could ever truly break through. But with Sod, he had found something he never thought possible: acceptance, love, and a future filled with hope. As they sat together, hand in hand, watching the last sliver of the sun disappear below the horizon, Adewale reflected on how far he had come. The man he had been, full of fear, insecurity, and doubt, felt like a distant memory now. He had spent so many years believing that he was too different, too flawed to be loved. But Sod had shown him that love didn't come with conditions. It wasn't about being perfect or meeting some impossible standard. It was about being seen for who you truly were and being loved for it. "I'm ready," Adewale said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Sod raised an eyebrow, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Ready for what?" "For everything," he replied, turning to face her fully. "Marriage, a family, a life with you. I'm ready to build that future." Sod's smile widened, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of joy. "I've been waiting for you to say that," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Adewale reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the small velvet box he had been carrying with him for weeks. His heart pounded in his chest as he pulled it out and knelt in front of her, opening the box to reveal a simple yet elegant ring. "Sod," he began, his voice trembling slightly with nerves, "I never thought I would find someone who could love me for who I am, who could see beyond the surface and love the man inside. You've changed my life in ways I can't even begin to describe, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much you mean to me. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Sod's cheeks as she nodded, her smile radiant. "Yes, Adewale. 1,000 times yes." Adewale slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling with a mixture of relief and joy. As he stood, Sod threw her arms around him, pulling him into a tight embrace. They stood there, holding each other as the stars began to appear in the night sky, their hearts full of love and the promise of a future they would build together. For the first time in his life, Adewale knew without a doubt that he was enough. He was loved, not despite his differences, but because of the man he was. With Sod by his side, he no longer had to carry the weight of his past alone. As they walked back through the park, hand in hand, Adewale glanced over at Sod, his heart swelling with gratitude for the woman who had changed his life. The whispers of the past had been silenced, replaced by the quiet certainty of a love that was real, lasting, and true. The journey to this moment had been long and painful, filled with heartbreak and rejection. But now, standing on the threshold of a new chapter, Adewale knew that every step had been worth it. With Sod by his side, he was no longer the man who hid from the world. He was a man who had found his place in it, a man who was truly, deeply loved. And that was more than enough. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe our channel.